All right. Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Syed Haider with my go-to doc and my go-to stack. And I'm here with our wonderful health coach, Michelle Harvey, who handles the Phoenix Lifestyle Coaching Program. She does one-on-one health coaching, and she also does group coaching. And so I guess to get started, yeah, we were just gonna both kind of like tell a little anecdote from our week. But I also wanted to ask you, Michelle, maybe after that to tell us a little bit about the health coaching program and how that's been going because it just started. But anyway, to begin, I think I mentioned this to you the last time we spoke. I started doing what's called the soleus push-up, and I've mentioned this
Mm.
I think yesterday too to in the live Q&A. Um, but yeah, like it's a very easy little move. And in the live Q&A yesterday, I kind of like buried the lead. I was like talking all about the Soleus push-up, but not really giving all the benefits up front. So why would you want to do this? The study that came out a few weeks ago made a lot of waves, and I'm glad I came across it. And it really seems kind of revolutionary. But basically, this muscle that makes up 1% of your body, it can double or triple your basal metabolic rate, which means the amount of energy you use while you're just sitting there doing nothing. It can go up by like 2 or 3x, and all you have to do is lift your heels off the ground and then let them drop down against gravity. So that's the soleus push-up. You can alternate your heels, or you can do them both at the same time. Alternating is a little bit easier. Once you get into the habit of it, if you spend a lot of time sitting, you can basically do it like all day long. So in the study, the study's a little bit vague, but people did it for up to 4.5 hours, the research volunteers, and they had metabolic effects that were really remarkable. So they had 50% lower blood sugar rises after meals, 60% lower insulin rises after meals. They lowered their very low density lipoproteins, the VLDLs, which are usually particularly bad for your cardiovascular health, and they also lowered triglycerides levels. Um, and the effects persisted after after the exercise was over. So during the exercise, and they don't go into a lot of detail for how long afterwards, you have a 2 or 3x rise in your metabolic rate. So I've tried things like a standing desk and I've tried a treadmill desk. It's really hard to concentrate while walking on a treadmill desk, and write or read something. But doing this little heel lift and then dropping your heels down is actually it's not that hard to do. It's very easy. The other thing about this, so this muscle is one of those muscles that's used for standing and walking. And those and the muscles used for posture, generally they don't get tired. So this muscle doesn't get tired. You can literally do this all day long without feeling tired. Your muscle doesn't get sore, doesn't get tired, nothing like that. It sucks sugar out of the blood, and uses that directly for its activity. And so again, just this tiny little move. So anyway, that's what I've been doing the last few days. I've been giving this a try. And why is it important for maybe long haulers and other people with chronic issues? I think it's because a lot of the underlying inflammatory underpinnings of a lot of chronic diseases are due to metabolic dysfunction. And so slightly above optimal range blood sugar and insulin and triglycerides and LDLs can cause a lot of inflammation in the body. And so if we can mop those up, and get them into optimal ranges. So the optimal range for blood sugar, I mean, it's going to vary person to person, but you want to get it down for like a fasting range. I think something around 80 to 90, if not even lower, which is pretty low. And then post meal, you don't want it to rise too high even post meal. And so there's a lot of people who are like pre-diabetic or just not optimal. So pre-diabetes is beyond that optimal range, but then most people are not necessarily pre-diabetic, but they're also not in the optimal range of fasting blood sugar and post-meal blood sugar. So that causes inflammation. And what we've seen with long haulers, and what I've heard reported from a lot of other people, even I recently spoke to Dr. Mobeen about this, is that it seems that carbs and, blood sugar is a big issue. So if you can lower blood sugar by either eating fewer refined carbohydrates or in other ways, that should be beneficial for the inflammation in general in your body, which should help you heal from anything, including long haul. So I don't know if that qualifies as an anecdote, maybe not, but
I think so, because you're
yeah,
trying it out.
I'm trying it out. Yeah. So what about you?
um I think my anecdote actually relates in some ways to the topic of the sleep toxins, but I had this week, I had this reminder about caffeine and how caffeine has this half-life of 7 hours. So after 7 hours, half the coffee is still the caffeine is still in your bloodstream. And because I decided to quit coffee, it's this, love-hate thing where I go in and out of having it and not. I think I'm just more sensitive to it. And I ate at the end of dinner a dessert, my friend makes these really amazing gluten-free desserts. And I had tiramisu, which I forgot has coffee in it. And I just couldn't sleep until maybe 3 a.m. I was just there, but it was a really strange feeling of the awareness of your body being fatigued, but your brain is like artificially stimulated. It's just such a bizarre feeling, like this discordance between those two things. And I just couldn't figure out what was going on, like what had gone wrong. And then suddenly around 2 a.m., I was like, oh yeah, the tiramisu. So it makes sense. But yeah, then I was thinking about how, well, this is one thing that some people mistake for insomnia is just drinking coffee in the afternoon, like at 4 p.m. You think, oh, it's far enough away from dinner time, but it's just really not. Like anything after 12 is really, it's still going to be in your bloodstream at bedtime. So yeah, I think mistaking insomnia for just like having afternoon coffees is something to think about.
Yeah, and some people, I think, I mean, if they have caffeine at any time, even like first thing in the morning at like 6 a.m. when they wake up, they're still going to have too much of it around to sleep really deeply. So they may sleep,
Mm,
but the quality of their sleep, and I think we've talked about this before, that really any amount of caffeine may affect the quality of your sleep. You may be able to fall asleep, but you're not going to get as deep and restful sleep as you may have
yeah,
otherwise. Um, yeah, and so like different people are less prone to feeling the effects of it. But
yeah,
so like some people are actually now recommending coffee and caffeine for long haulers. But like the thing that you described is like basically what it feels like to be a long hauler. Like your mind is racing, or it's like
hmm,
you're exhausted, you feel totally
yeah,
exhausted, and yet you're like thinking at like 100 miles a second and you can't go to sleep. And so like it's like the whole wired and tired thing,
yeah, yeah. It
which
didn't
is
make
really
sense at
common.
all. It was like I did like a 6 hour dance workshop. I played tennis. I took like loads of heavy books upstairs. I was like, okay, I'm tired. Clearly, like what's happening here? Like, why is there this disconnect happening? It doesn't make sense. But actually, we're genetically predisposed to be a slow or fast metabolizer of caffeine, and you
Hmm.
can do a genetic test for that. So I think this for me is the real thing, because that differentiates the people who are like, I feel great, I have mental clarity, I feel amazing when I have coffee, I get
Yeah.
the antioxidants from coffee and all of that. Those are the fast metabolizers. And then the slow metabolizers are the ones who have like the shakiness, the nausea, like feeling dizzy, all of that kind of thing. So it's just really hard to put this blanket statement on it being good or bad. And I think it's just super
Mm.
polarized in the health sphere.
Yeah,
Um,
and like it just points, or like shows how important it is to just like listen to yourself. Like
yeah,
people,
that's
everyone
everything
already
comes down
knows. You
to
don't really need a
that.
genetic test, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
you can
yeah,
already yourself
yeah.
how you feel. Okay, great. So the other thing that we were going to talk about was just like on the theme, I guess the kind of monthly theme, which we're covering nowadays is toxins. So you were going to
Mhm.
talk a little bit
Yes.
about that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think this segues into also this sleep topic, because I think we've spoken a lot about all the different ways to kind of prepare yourself for sleep, like blocking the blue light and on your phone. And there are a lot of things you can do for your room, like with the blackout curtains, and also noise machines, like a white noise machine if you live somewhere quite loud. And then there are also these, I'm not sure if you've seen them, they're alarm clocks which emit light, so that you wake up with light instead of with the sound. And then also the chill, I think it's called chill sleep. It's like a sleep pad that keeps your body at a certain temperature, because sleep is really regulated by temperature. But one thing I didn't know so much about was actually how toxic sleep, like bed linens and mattresses and things, can
Mm.
be. And, you know, I think I kind of knew this, like I knew that it was a thing, but I didn't want to research it because I wasn't really in the market to buy a new bed. So I was like,
Yeah.
I'd rather not know. But because
Right.
I've just moved into a new place, I was really on this thing of like buying a new mattress. And I read some really crazy things. Like apparently your mattress can double in weight due to dust
Yes.
mites and like dead skin cells and
Yeah.
fecal matter from the mites, like hundreds of thousands of mites that live in mattresses. And over the space of 5 to 10 years, it can actually double in weight, which is horrible.
It's
Um,
horrifying. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So that, and then also, apparently there are some regulations on like bed sheets and things being fire resistant. So they have to go through certain tests to be flame to have like with flame retardants and things like that. They're treated with flame retardants because they have to have like a certain heat on them at this time and not catch fire within this amount of time. Um, yeah, so these are really toxic chemicals that they use like in bed linens and bed sheets and on mattresses. So that is something to look out for. And then also in terms of the paint that they put on bed frames, a lot of the actual paint gives off toxic fumes in the air. So all of those things combined, the mattress, the bed linens, and the actual bed frames are really a big thing. And when you think that we spend, a third of our life sleeping, it's because you don't have this impression, right, that you're there for that long because it goes really fast when you're asleep. But you're there for a long time. That's a lot of time to be lying on and breathing in this stuff and lying in dust mites, and especially if you have like a secondhand mattress or any of these things. So it's definitely something to pay attention to. And we're going to be sharing the brand recommendations of different mattresses. I did a lot of research on different brands, and then also the certifications to look out for, because it's the same kind of thing like with meat and eggs and all these things. Like there's cage free and there's all natural and there's pasture raised and there's this, and no one really knows what these things mean. It's kind of the same as with the bed. So you can look out for certain labels that would indicate that that the materials are grown organically and that they're not treated it with chemicals. Oh yeah, because this is also another huge thing. I mean, cotton is one of the most sprayed crops when it comes to pesticides. So this is, something to pay attention to with clothes also, and why it's important to buy clothes made with organic cotton. And of course, natural fibers like cotton, wool, linen, flannel, like all of these are natural fibers um, that you can buy organic, and that's obviously much better than synthetic fabrics. But even if you are buying cotton, to look out for organic, just because it's so heavily sprayed with pesticides.
Mm. Yeah, when I was looking into this a couple of years ago, I came across the futonshop.com, and I just saw that they have
Oh
a
yeah.
sale up right
Mhm.
now, up to 70% off, ending November 7th. So if anyone's in the looking for a mattress, um, yeah, they can get expensive, but right now they're like heavily discounted. And I don't have any connection with the futon shop, but I'm
Mhm.
just letting you guys know. And it reminds me that when I was looking into this, I actually bought like a wool mattress, so it doesn't have springs or anything, or
Oh yeah.
latex or foam or anything. It's just full of wool.
Mm.
And that is like, it's naturally fire retardant, right? So
Yeah.
it doesn't like it doesn't go into a big
Mm.
blaze or something. So they don't have to add um, flame retardant chemicals to
Yeah.
some of their organic and just all natural mattresses.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
And
think it's really important, like you said. I mean, we spend so much time sleeping, and we get like water filters and air filters, and like you spend some, people who are like into this, they do a lot, but then they don't realize that like they're just sitting there inhaling this really toxic stuff, and
And dust
they
mites.
off gas the dust mites too.
Mm,
And so a lot of people with if you have lung problems or like asthma or really like a lot of different things, these toxins can concentrate in your body and contribute to a lot of chronic disease.
mm. Another thing I didn't think about regarding the springs, it's good that you brought that up, is that I was reading about how you're basically lying on an EMF conducting thing,
Yeah.
which
Right.
I hadn't really thought of. I was like, oh yeah, you're lying on metal springs, which are basically, zapping you with EMFs like all night. You're just lying there. So this is another good thing, like coil-free mattresses. I also just bought a Japanese like handmade cotton one that's just stuffed with cotton, so there are no
Yeah.
coils, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
this rice and bamboo like tatami base. Um, because yeah, that is something also. I mean, of course, the research on this is always like shaky, and then some people say it's not true at all, but there is some interesting research about the EMFs, and especially they affect children more. So buying coil-free mattresses for kids is also something to
Yeah,
pay attention.
so like you're saying, like there's some really cheap options, right? Like just a futon, So
Yeah.
the futon shop doesn't just sell futons, I should be clear on that. It sells all kinds of mattresses, including spring mattresses and natural latex rubber mattresses and all kinds of things.
Mhm.
I also learned a lot about like the toxic off-gassing from different kinds of like foam, like memory foam. A lot of people love
Yeah.
memory foam. It,
Mm.
it off-gasses a lot of toxic chemicals. And the other thing that I just remembered when you were saying, about the spring mattresses. So like, if you have a spring mattress, maybe just keep your phone turned off while you're asleep or like
Yeah.
on airplane mode or something, because the tower like, pings and like zeroes in on your phone. And if it's turned off, you still may have some EMF in your surroundings, but you're not actually getting like an antenna pointed straight at your phone sending data to
Mm.
it. But the other thing that reminded me of was I just learned yesterday, or remembered yesterday. I was looking up. I was trying to. I once in a while I Google and try to figure out whether anyone has tested the EMFs in a Tesla, car.
Mm.
So yesterday or the last couple of days when I did that, just somebody was just saying that if you have your phone on in a car, the EMF gets concentrated inside this metal cage that you're, driving around in.
Mm.
And that can be particularly harmful also. So,
Mm.
one thing people can do is, a lot of people use the map thing on their phone when they're driving, but you can download the maps, even in Google Maps. You don't have to have your phone actually turned on to use maps and to use
Yeah.
navigation. I mean, you don't
Yeah.
have to have it connected to the network. It can be on airplane mode if you download the maps.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's also good for just walking around, having your phone on airplane mode while it's on your body or in your pocket or whatever.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's important. And like you said, there's like not a whole lot of data on EMFs, but there have been some books written on these topics, and there's data going back like decades on the effect of electromagnetic fields on human
mm.
cells and on human health. And um, there is actually a lot of data. And one of the surprising things when I was looking into EMS was that I read that cell phone manufacturers themselves recommend that you keep cell phones like a certain number of inches away from your
Yeah.
body, right? Like
Hmm.
you're not actually supposed to put them in your pocket right next to right next to your
Yeah.
body, right next to your skin. Like that's not considered safe use of a cell phone, which is kind of insane, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you can't avoid touching them to use
No,
them,
no.
and people stick them, right next to their head. So anyway,
For
um,
hours.
yeah. So, was there any? Yeah, I highly recommend, yeah, not putting a cell phone near your
Mm.
head, because you can see like there are changes in your brain that happen. There's like just like the heating effect on your brain is quite
Mm.
significant. On that side that you're using it,
Mm.
definitely keep them out of the hands of kids. I mean, we don't even let our kids use phones or tablets or anything really. Um, and that, not even getting into like the social media and all the other stuff, just just talking
Mm-hmm.
about EMS. But was there anything else you wanted to say about the sleep environment and like toxins during sleep?
I think the only last thing was about filters, using air filters, keeping the humidity to a good level, and then also using like a HEPA air filter that filters the dust mites, because the filters all have different kind of strain. They can filter things of different particle size. So yeah, HEPA filters are the best for filtering dust and bacteria and dust mites and things like that. So I think those things combined can probably make a good sleep environment. So,
Yeah,
but
I
it's
just want.
also,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, go. I was going to say it's just funny how when you live in a city, because I just moved back to a city, like how many things you need to just be normal, you know? I was kind of like, oh my gosh, if I lived somewhere in the countryside with fresh air, I wouldn't need this filter, and I wouldn't need this sound machine, and I wouldn't need this like alarm clock with the, like all of these things you just need. So it sounds like a lot of things, but that's only because we're so distant. We've spoken about this a lot of times, but I think it's good to reinforce. It's like the further away we get from our natural environment, the more you're exposed to things that you need to kind of protect yourself from. Because I think there's kind of a level of absurdity that people think like, oh, this seems weird, like why do you need all of this? And like there is an explanation from it. It's like, okay, go live in a cabin in the woods and just sleep on the floor every day and don't use electricity, you'll be good. But not many people are actually going to do that. So so we kind of need to know about what these things are.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know why I remember this, but I was just looking over the FLCCC's post-vaccine treatment protocol, and it's like a PDF document where they go into more detail about the protocol. And so they've written a page or so about sunlight and photobiomodulation. I just was just thinking that, like, one of the biggest issues for people in the modern world is that we just spend all our time indoors, right? Like we never go outside. And so anyway, they reference a study saying that a recent large prospective study demonstrated that avoiding sun exposure is a risk factor for all-cause mortality or death. And in that study, the mortality rate amongst those who avoided sun exposures was approximately twice as high compared with the highest sun exposure group. Yeah, so and they go into some of the details about like why it's so important, right? So it stimulates vitamin D synthesis. It improves mitochondrial function, increases ATP production. It also lowers a number of different markers of inflammation. And this is just like what we know about it, right? There's also Stephanie Seneff has this great article about some other possible beneficial pathways for the sun and how it benefits cardiovascular and especially vascular health. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that, and also just to put this whole kind of discussion into context that, like, when people are healthy, their bodies can put up with a lot of toxic insults and all kinds of like poor lifestyle choices, but it does create a stress on you, right? So I think if you wanted to maintain optimal health and longevity and like the longest health span possible instead of just lifespan, or both, obviously, you should take into account all these things and try to clean up your environment as much as possible and optimize your lifestyle as much as possible. But it becomes especially important when you're sick, right? Because the things that didn't affect you so much, or at least you could still function, if you, when you're sick, start to clean things up and remove things, you may actually oftentimes see that you get better and a lot faster. So I think it's important for long haulers, especially, to consider all of these things. And the other thing is, don't get overwhelmed, right? It can be
Yeah, I was
overwhelming. It
about to
can be
say
really
that.
overwhelming. So
I was
tell
about
us
to
more about
say,
that. How do we
yeah.
like take it step by step, you know?
Well, this is a huge thing that I speak about a lot in regards to coaching. And this is a big role, I think, of coaching, which is helping people prioritize what to do in what order. Because, there's a reason why when I started talking about the bed thing, it was because I was in the market to get a new bed. So that's why I focused more. But before, I just knew it was something to pay attention to, but I didn't want to know the other stuff because I knew I wasn't at that time able to, because it's like a rented place or like a shared place or whatever. So yeah, I think that it's okay to kind of just think, because there are a lot more important things. For example, just sleeping is more important than changing your mattress. So if you're sleeping for 5 hours a night, that's more important to prioritize and organize than buying a new mattress. So it's sort of, if you're able to financially, because it is really quite expensive, as you said, also, if you're able to financially, and you've tried a lot of other things, you've changed. I mean, the first things that you should always change is the things that you're eating and how you're moving and what you're exposing your personal body to. Like, that's the first thing that we should change. And then, after that, we can kind of be like, okay, let's look around the house and see what there is. Of course, if you can do everything at once, that's great. But it's more important to change your diet and sleeping and moving than it is to like buy a HEPA air filter, for example. So yeah, just to keep that in mind, and if you, and not kind of, I don't know, some people are predisposed to this, like going on rabbit holes about things and then freaking out about some subject that have been affecting them or could have affected them in the last 10 years, and they have no control over it. This is a big thing. It's like, don't freak out about the things you have no control over. If you're a student in a rented, dorm or whatever, it's not going to be convenient for you to change that. But if it is in your control, then to pay attention to it.
Yeah,
So,
and some people, depending on their medical history or just wherever they are in their life, I mean, some things might take more priority than others.
yeah, of course.
So
Yeah,
that's the other thing.
yeah.
So this, brings me back to what I just wanted to ask you, like how the health coaching is going, because it's really gotten started in the last month or 6 weeks, right? So how's that been? How's that experience been?
Yeah, it's going really well. I think people, everyone's really varied, of course, and this is really the most important thing. It's kind of how to, because we all have an idea. I mean, most people have some idea of these different things that might affect your health, but it's how to choose what to do first and how kind of intensely you should integrate things. And then my role as a coach is kind of determining, oh, is this going to overwhelm someone? Like if I send someone something that they should focus on that week and then I don't hear from them for like a month, that's not a good sign, because it just means it's like, oh, this is too much, I'm just going to close off. It has to be like, oh, engagement, and okay, I'm going to do that, I'm going to start that tomorrow. Okay, great, I've integrated that, what else can I do? It's finding this spot of starting new habits and then integrating them quickly and feeling like it's easeful and you're able to, and you're kind of able to ask questions and then have them answered in a way that makes sense, that helps you integrate in a more easeful way. It shouldn't be like something really overwhelming and something, just unmanageable. So that's something that I try to focus on a lot with the coaching. And I would say that's probably the most important thing, because, you only get better if you start making changes. And we all make changes in such different ways. So it's important to find out what is your way and what you're able to sustain. So,
yeah. Yeah, I think one of the biggest, like for me personally, stumbling blocks to just getting started is like, it just seems overwhelming. There's so much stuff. And then, if you just do one small thing, you feel like it's like worthless. It's like, what's the point of
yeah.
doing this one tiny thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you do it, like, you just see that it snowballs over time, and it just gets easier and
Mm-hmm.
easier over time to make bigger and bigger changes, and
Mm-hmm.
and a bunch of small things add up too.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also, I mean, one thing that I was speaking about with the group coaching is that, when it comes to lab tests, because we have a list of lab tests that we give people, that they can take it in the case of long COVID, and then how they can correct those with supplementation and other supportive supplements for long COVID. People can get really fixated on that, because I think it's this idea that they're going to find the magic bullet that, oh, this whole time I just had this deficiency in zinc and now everything's good, And I feel that this very prescriptive and kind of precise framework, which is lab testing and supplements, offers those kind of people an opportunity to kind of take that as, oh, great, this is going to be my magic bullet and I'm going to just correct my labs and everything's going to be fine. But yeah, I think this is a mistake to think. I mean, there are cases where that does happen, and people just make a small change and they're good. But usually the reason chronic illness happens is an accumulated a mass of micro things, micro stresses that built up over a long time. So therefore getting out of that is going to be the same process, like an accumulated of changes that you can make that will then support, as you said, like small things compound over time, and that's how you got there, and that's how you're going to get out. So yeah, I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind, because yeah, I mean, it's the same with diet changes. Actually, I had a client some years ago who had really not a good diet, and he was a shift worker, so he basically his circadian rhythm was really messed up, and he also smoked. And then one day he just said, oh, I think I'm going to cut out nightshade vegetables because that's the problem. And I was like, okay, this is quite so random. Like, okay, maybe, but this doesn't make sense, in the context of your life. Like, there's just so many other things, and you're just looking for this thing that's going to just switch and everything's going to be fine now, and usually that doesn't exist. So if you're kind of setting up your expectations in that way, then you might be disappointed, and it's good to kind of reframe the idea of healing.
Yeah, I think people are always looking for like meaning and like a sign or something, and when they start to think about changing things, like something will just come across their consciousness, like nightshade, like eliminating nightshade
Yeah.
vegetables, and they latch onto it and like, oh, well,
Yeah.
I'll try that, because the universe sent it to me, or God sent it to me
Mm-hmm.
right now to see. And there's always like going to be people out there who have benefited from eliminating nightshade vegetables. You can always find some
Mm-hmm.
people who are like have a religious fervor for getting rid of nightshade vegetables because that was the thing that did it for them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think you're right. Just having a coach and or a doctor, or just like some sort of person to help you sort through the million and one things that you could do right now, to
Yeah.
prioritize what's most important, in a step-by-step way is really helpful. And like you were saying, like even if you do find one thing that you can push one lever and your long COVID symptoms get better, or your chronic illness symptoms start to get better, there's still like you still have a lot of other issues, and all of those things, whatever else that hasn't been fixed yet or straightened out, leaves you still more susceptible to slipping back into the
Mm-hmm.
problem. So some people like become functional again and their symptoms go away, but they find that they are still prone to developing them if they if
Yeah.
they're under stress, or if they don't sleep well or something. And it just means
Yeah.
that there's more to it, right? Like you're still
Yeah.
not completely like recovered. There's still some weakness.
Well, yeah, and this actually segues into, the other thing. Well, unless you want to speak more on this
No,
subject, I was going to
let's go.
segue into
Sure.
the histamine, because last week we had a question about histamines, the best resource I think it was for histamines. And it's interesting because, histamine intolerance is often um, linked to SIBO, to heavy metal toxicity, to
Small intestinal
methylation.
bacterial overgrowth, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and genetic issues, yeah, heavy metals, other types of infection, and methylation, also dysfunction. um so and histamine, you can just kind of remove exogenous histamines from your diet and you might feel better, but you still have whatever is triggering that histamine intolerance in the first place. So it's not really it's not really a long-term solution for it. And to backtrack and speak about histamines a little bit, it's, I mean, for anyone who isn't sure, histamines are, say if you get bitten by a mosquito or a bug and your skin gets red, that's essentially a histamine response. It's an immune response to something that's an allergen that your body comes in contact with. And sometimes our histamines can, you can think of it sort of like as a glass of water, and you have internal histamines, but also foods that have histamines in them. But then there's also foods that trigger internal histamine release. So, you can, if you just have too many of your internal histamines and then add that with histamine inducing food and foods that contain histamines, it just becomes too much. But it's important to find out, rather than just say like, okay, I'm going to be on a low histamine diet forever. Why are you having this? Is it a SIBO that's left untreated? Is it heavy metal toxicity? Is it, whatever, dysbiosis of the gut? Because even if you're able to, stop the histamines and keep that up forever, which I can't imagine how anyone could, because it's like no more coffee or chocolate or like fermented stuff. I don't know. But if you even are managed to do that, those issues are going to be manifesting in your body and cause issues of other kinds. So this is why it's really important to figure out, what's actually going wrong. But there is a book that I made a note of. So Dr. Janice Janeja, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but she has a book called Beginner's Guide to Histamine Intolerance. And I think that is a good one to start when it comes to understanding that. And of course, histamine intolerance is also related to mast cell activation disorder. And the mast cells are the immune cells in our body, and they release histamines. So a lot of people will mistake histamine intolerance for mast cell activation disorder, but actually the things that cause mast cell activation are the similar things. It's like heavy metal, gut issues, like they're all intertwined with that also. So those are really the root things to kind of find out. And of course it's helpful to do a low histamine diet, and because it's useful. It's like if you have a food intolerance, it's good to not have that food until you heal and you're able to have it again, right? It's like scratching a wound. You don't want to keep doing that, but it's not good to think of it as the long-term solution. So yeah,
Right.
this is something.
Yeah. So like getting to the bottom of it, you really need a functional medicine workup, and hopefully we will be offering functional medicine the next week or two for patients at mygotodoc.com. And you can, if you have this issue and it's not getting better with some long haulers have MCAS, and in some cases it goes away after a period of treatment with things like ivermectin and also mast cell stabilizers. Sometimes we prescribe Singulair, Chromalin. Sometimes also the oral antihistamines that are over the counter are included in the protocol. And then, some of the supplements that are recommended are also help with that. So quercetin, for example.
And vitamin C and turmeric, they're also really good. And we recommend those for mast cells.
So if it's not, shifting with like the general COVID, long COVID approach and therapies, then I would recommend getting a functional medicine workup either through my go-to-doc or your preferred functional medicine provider, and getting like just a number of kind of like labs done to drill down into the the ultimate kind of cause behind the scenes, and then addressing that.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, everything we do in the coaching programs, they support these anyway. Like we have a module on digestion. We talk about stress, which is really related with the mast cell activation. We talk about sleep, which is also linked to it. We recommend the supplements that are already helpful for it. We talk about gut dysbiosis and how to like have gut healing foods. So yeah, I mean, we're doing all of those things anyway, but it is good to know, if you're not getting better, even after making all these changes, you're not getting better. It's good to, maybe you need a heavy metal detox, which is like a specialized protocol. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's that book, and I mean, I will mention that there's a number of high histamine and histamine releasing food lists online, but there is some there's some differences of opinion which foods should be included on them, but there is a lot of overlap. So at the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, do I feel worse when I eat something, and avoid it.
We always come back to that. It's like there's all of this, but what it comes back to is testing on your own body. Because histamine is actually, it's similar to the AIP diet, that there is an AIP protocol. And that was another question that someone asked. There is an AIP protocol developed by Sarah Ballantyne and Mickey Truscott, who are kind of the people pioneering the research also on the AIP. And they have an elimination period. So every week you eliminate a different group. It's grains one week, and then legumes, and then dairy. And it's often the case that people can introduce most of those foods again and be fine. It's not like everyone will have an issue with all of them. And it's the same as histamine. Some people will have a huge issue with one thing and others won't. So, but you can start with just getting a general idea.
What do you think of there was this one diet that was super super restrictive. I'm forgetting the name of it, but like I think it
Gaps.
was developed GAPS diet, right? Yeah. Where you start off just drinking bone broth or something and having nothing
Yeah.
else. Just bone broth.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually quite a big fan of the lady who developed it. I think her name's Natasha Campbell McBride,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Is that her name?
yeah.
Yeah, because I really like her book, Put Your Heart in Your Mouth, which is about atherosclerosis and all. And I just think that her books are really great because they're scientific, but they're also written for people who have these disorders to be able to understand and read and make actual changes in your life. And I think her book Gaps is specifically for, if I remember rightly, things like ADHD and attention
Mhm.
disorders and hyperactivity and all these kind of things. So she focuses on that as it relates to, because of the gut brain axes and all of these. So yeah, I do really like her books and her work.
Yeah, I feel like at least at the margins that our whole society is becoming more kind of like, developing more problems with attention, and it's related to the media that we consume, right? Like if you look
Yeah.
back at the media that was consumed like 1,000 years ago in the form of like written like stories and stuff, they're very, very slow paced compared to what we're used to now in
Mm.
stories. And just like looking at the cartoons from my childhood versus the cartoons today, or the movies from 100 years ago compared to the movies today, um, every passing generation, every passing like few years, like things just get compressed and compressed, right? And now we have like, TikTok and like,
Yeah.
we go from listening to people talk for an hour to listening to somebody talk for like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And that's the attention span. So I don't know, it's hard to understand how, if you're training your mind for that, like for your entire life, right? Starting from when you're a toddler, when somebody puts like
Mm.
a tablet into your hand to keep you busy and quiet, you know, all day long. What do you expect, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do you expect your attention span to be when you've never trained your mind to attend to
Mhm.
something for longer than, a tiny period of time?
And that combined with these things, the gut health and the processed food and brain fog from certain foods and, all of these things married together create these kind of dysfunctions. But yeah, I think everyone should have a look at, there's a great page on Our World in Data called Time Use. And I've spoken about this before, but it's just loads of different infographics about how we spent our time over the last 100 years and what we would spend our time on and how much free time we have. And it's just interesting to see how much more free time we have now because of technology, but the perception of free time is really low. So it helps you kind of, because I think it's like, oh, now everyone's so busy because of this and this. And it's sort of like we're actually less busy, but we just feel like we have less time. So I think just finding out the actual data on that is quite helpful to put things in perspective.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
time is really subjective, and so maybe people just like, I don't know, are enjoying their lives less or something, right? Like your experience of time depends on whether you're enjoying yourself too, right? Like, um,
Yeah, well, I think it's also the number of activities that you do that people do also.
mm,
Yeah, like when you do a lot of things, I feel like you can feel that there's been a lot of time. Whereas when things are slower, as you said, um, I don't know, like being slower is just a more natural rhythm of doing things. And when you frenetically do like a lot of activities, I think there's the perception that the time is going really fast.
yeah, so like we're I think cramming too much information into our brains, right? Like there's
Mm.
not this time, like this downtime. Like people used to spend a lot of time just kind of um like instead of being like focused on something coming out of a phone like all day long, right? Information flowing into your brain all the time. There were these times that were built into your day where you're just like not thinking of anything, or
Mhm.
like, or and then times that where you were very focused on work for like an hour or two
Yeah.
hours and like really deep, intense focus, and then you would like take a break and go wash your clothes and not really think about anything, for an hour,
Or
and
pick things in the
go
field
and
or
walk and, yeah,
yeah.
pick things, or like go to the well, an hour away
Mm.
and bring back the water, and just have this decompression time where your brain is just kind of like, hazy and not really focused on
Yeah.
anything. So I think we need all
Yeah.
those different times, those different types of activities. And that's the issue with like all the conveniences of modern life, that
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
we've taken away all the things that we used to have to do, that were just part of being like a normal, healthy, happy human being.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy how inconvenient. I mean, right now I don't have a washing machine in my house. It's kind of like this New York City thing where you have to go to a laundromat. And I haven't done laundry once since being back in Portugal because I'm like, I don't have time to go there, which is ridiculous because I'm sure I could manage to do it. But just the inconvenience because you're not used to it, right? You're used to having a washing machine at home. So the inconvenience is just so big that, and I'm like, what will I do? And I'm there, just stand there and look at the washing machine. Like, I'm like imagining, what am I going to do? And I'm like, okay, is there a nice cafe close by? Like, I'm thinking, how will I entertain myself while the washing, there's just all of these things that your mind does. And then it's like, okay, for no, I'm not going to do it for now. So, and before it was just washing by hand was like a completely normal thing. Integrate. There was no other option. You just do that process and that's just part of your day. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, like I think, um, when you give your brain some downtime, like the times when you actually do work and like focus are far more productive. So
Yeah, definitely.
I think people have
Mm,
lost a lot of productivity trying to be like productive all the time, or like some
mm,
people like the workaholics who are trying to like work all day long. Um, and they don't exercise and they don't sleep enough and they don't do anything, right? Like if you exercise and you sleep better and you eat
yeah.
better and you spend some time like meditating and just like defocusing, you'll find that you get the same amount done or more in like half the
Mm,
time or a third of the time,
yeah.
or right.
This is why the 4-hour work week has actually increased productivity for a lot of
Hmm.
companies because it's just concentrated what people would do and they would have spread it out otherwise. Um, so yeah, that's interesting. Shall I talk about the probiotics? That's the last
Yeah,
question
this
in
is
the
another question that these are some questions that I got during my live streams, and
yeah.
I left them for Michelle to answer because I wasn't sure if there was a best time to take a
Yeah.
probiotic or prebiotic.
The probiotics thing is really interesting actually because it's kind of like with everything, there's so many conflicting ideas on probiotics. And there's actually an interesting study that shows that because people always think, oh, I'm going to take probiotics after I take antibiotics. And there's actually an interesting study to show that after 7 days of taking a really strong antibiotic, people took probiotics and didn't take probiotics. And the people who didn't take probiotics actually had more beneficial bacteria out of the 10 to 15 species that they recorded. Um, so yeah, so actually taking the probiotics disrupted the natural regrowth of bacteria and repopulating. So yeah, I just think that, and then there's other people that will say, definitely take them, even take them with the antibiotics. So I don't think there is any unanimous thing answer, but there is a lot of research that shows that probiotics really help with things like irritable bowel, things like candida and yeast, because they help to calibrate the microbial populations properly, and even some focus related things, probiotics. There are a lot of studies that show that they help. In terms of the time of day, I think so there's soil-based probiotics. I think they're called spore biotics. And then there's also like things like lactobacillus, which is cultured. So they're the ones that you find in yogurt and fermented food. So the spore-based probiotics, they actually are resilient to they're I think the only probiotics that are resilient all the way through the digestive tract. Like they can withstand acid and other digestive processes because because they're soil based, so they're kind of designed to be exposed to certain things. So that's quite good, compared to the lactobacillus, which a lot of people say become damaged by stomach acid and other things. So people say with the lactobacillus to take it not with food, because you don't want to take it when your digestive juices are working. But the spore-based ones you can take with food, and they're fine to take at any time.
Unless your lactobacillus probiotic is like in a capsule that goes into the intestine, like passes through the stomach without being broken down.
I don't know if that, I guess, yeah, that maybe they do create capsules that maybe with that
Like
carry
enteric
on.
coated, maybe.
Yeah, maybe it could be,
But
rather
it's
than
still going to
having it through
be kind of
food.
like going in with your food bolus, and like all of the
Yeah,
food and the gastric juices and everything are still going to be around. And so, yeah, it probably
yeah,
makes sense not to have it, because all those juices are going to continue along with the enteric coated capsule into the
yeah,
intestines.
yeah. I think that is kind of the main thing with the timing, to pay attention to. And then there is something about
So typically, like in our diet, like we would get the lactobacilli and like what, dairy and fermented
yeah,
vegetables and stuff.
yeah, yeah, that's in kefir and ferments and things like that, um as opposed to, yeah, taking them in a capsule.
Maybe there's just so much of them in the foods that some of them make it through to benefit
Yeah,
us.
yeah, I think so. Yeah, compared to if, yeah, you're just taking a small scoop or a capsule. But the interesting thing about the spore-based ones is that we would get those through eating fruits and things that had soil on them, right? So, and now we're not so much exposed to eating soil. I
Yeah.
guess it's like we're washing our vegetables and they kind of appear all shiny in the grocery store. And although there's interesting, a lot of research about kids who grew up on farms, like they have better microbiomes and less allergies and things like that, because they're eating soil and doing normal kid things that kids in the city aren't really exposed to, and probably those spore-based probiotics. Um, there are some foods that inhibit kind of the colonization of probiotics, because the idea is that we want them to colonize your
Do they
um
colonize? I thought they didn't colonize, that like they just passed through after a couple of weeks, which is like, there's all this research on like probiotics, and it's really in its infancy. I mean, it seems like the only way I know of to really get it to colonize is
mm,
to do like a stool transplant. like
yeah,
like
yeah,
you gotta bring it in with like all the other stuff that like it needs to survive, for it
mhm.
to really like um lay claim to your gut and stick around.
Yeah, I think there is, like as you said, a lot of controversy on this, but I just know the one thing is, I think it's called quorum sensing inhibitors. So
Mm.
it's this idea of certain foods that inhibit the implant, basically, of the colony of new bacteria that you want to populate. And I think things like, I think it's lemon or turmeric, something. There is, I think, quercetin actually inhibits is that. So yeah, just to pay attention to what foods would stop that, to not eat them with the probiotic. But if you look up quorum sensing inhibitors, then you can find the list of foods that would, prevent the population from colonizing. But I think, again, with this thing, we always come back to this every time, but it's sort of like, don't you it's better not to think of this as like, oh wow, this sounds really complicated, I'm just not going to take probiotics. Because they're gonna, even if you take lactobacillus with food and at the, not in the right time, and you're not taking the ideal one, you're still going to have benefits from that, and there are loads of studies that show that's the case. So, over optimization, trying to be perfect over just kind of like being good is definitely a downfall of people on their health journeys. So yeah, that is important. And also, probiotics really help to absorb, I think, vitamin D, iron. There's certain probiotics that increase iron absorption by like 50%. Also with vitamin D and and some other minerals. So they also have that effect, which is good. It's in particular the spore-based ones, because they're, going all the way through your digestive tract.
One probiotic that I was just talking to like a clinician who treats long COVID, and he mentioned Akkermansia muciniphila. So this is a probiotic that feeds on the mucin layer of your gut, and it actually
Mm.
stimulates your gut to create more mucus, which is helpful in sealing the gut, especially for people who might have autoimmune diseases and maybe a leaky gut issue.
Yeah.
But then it also, but after feeding on the mucus layer and stimulating it to become thicker, it creates food that other probiotics or probiotic type of bacteria feed on in your gut. So
Yeah.
there's
Yeah. Well, probiotics and prebiotics, actually, we didn't mention that, because that
yeah.
is the important thing.
Yeah, so there's prebiotic foods, or you can get like some prebiotic fibers along with your probiotic, or take them separately in order to help feed the beneficial bacteria in the gut.
Yeah, things like inulin, the kind of indigestible fiber that feeds, especially in the large intestine, it feeds the bacteria that lives there. So I think taking those in combination is always a good thing, rather than just one.
So there are a few foods that are rich in prebiotic fibers. I mean, the ones that I remember, I think, are Jerusalem artichokes, and then the very
Yeah.
common one is just green bananas, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
It
and you
has a
can
lot of
get green
prebiotic.
banana flour also,
Mm,
and make things from it, like chapatis or something like that. Um,
I'm enjoying your accent.
okay,
Okay.
I was like, why is this funny? Okay.
Yeah. Um,
um,
we would say chapatis, but okay.
okay. Yeah,
Um, yeah, you say, I can't even say what you said.
chapati.
All right.
Yeah, well, those kind of flatbread things are good for making with green banana flour.
Oh, that sounds interesting. I never thought of making a flatbread with the flour. Yeah. Um, all right. So yeah, anyway, this clinician recommended it for MCAS and long COVID in general. I mean, he himself said that the 3 or 4 people who had started Akkermansia muciniphila reported pretty rapid benefits from it. So the other thing, we just got a question in the live chat about the best way to supplement zinc, how much is best, and the food sources, um, and so what Chris Masterjohn has a great kind of nutrition guide for long COVID, and if we're answering this question from the perspective of long COVID, in general, we're nowadays, like, as a general recommendation, right, like, this is not specific, and you can test your zinc levels and copper levels, and you need to kind of balance zinc and copper intake, but generally speaking, we're, for most people, recommending like about 50 to 60 milligrams of zinc a day, and that, I guess, is the I like the elemental zinc. So like the zinc that you're taking is probably something like zinc acetate, and it has a certain percentage of it which corresponds to elemental zinc. So there are, the best way to get things like zinc would be from nutritional sources like foods. So oysters have a lot of zinc in them, and that you can get some oyster extract supplements that can give you a significant amount of zinc, or you can
I think
take
Oyster Max is the one.
Oyster Max, yeah, is a good one. Um, and then a zinc supplement like zinc acetate, or zinc citrate, or zinc sulfate. I think that the only, like, just avoid the zinc oxide and zinc picolinate. I'm not sure why. Do you know?
I think one of them causes some kind of digestive issues.
Yeah. Okay. And also avoid taking the zinc with whole grains, nuts, seeds, legumes, or coffee.
Yeah,
Is that
those are
for
because,
absorption?
yeah, because there's phytates and
Mm.
anti-nutrients and things in legumes that kind of block mineral absorption.
And then, I mean, a lot of people during this whole COVID fiasco have been taking a lot of zinc every day, and no one's really been talking about copper and balancing it out
Yeah.
with copper. So, so that's another important thing, to make sure you're taking copper if you're taking zinc for a long time.
Yeah, and this is also why it's best to eat whole foods as opposed to, supplement, because you don't have to think about these things. You don't have to, know that oysters have the perfect ratio of zinc to copper because they're just packaged like that already in nature. So as soon as you start, supplementing for long periods of time, you risk this becoming out of sync with the other nutrients that work in symbiosis with that nutrient. So especially
Yeah,
the minerals.
yeah. So the oysters have come with copper. They
Yeah,
have copper in
yeah.
them.
Yeah, they're ready made
Mm,
with the copper.
that's good. Um, all right. So from Chris Masterjohn's kind of nutritional recommendations for long haulers, what he says is, while using high dose zinc, aim to get 4 to 8 milligrams of copper per day. Mix and match from the following. If you chose oysters for the nutritional zinc part, they provide 2 milligrams of copper. If instead you chose a zinc supplement that had copper in it at a 15-to-1 ratio, so like Jarrow Zinc Balance is one of the supplements that has zinc and a small amount of copper, that provides 4 milligrams of copper. For each additional 2 milligrams you need, you can use any of the following food options. So all of these have 2 milligrams of copper in them: 25 grams of spirulina, 40 grams of shiitake mushrooms. Who measures out their mushrooms, right? 50 grams of sesame seeds, 50 grams of cocoa powder, 56 grams of 90% dark chocolate, 70 grams of 70% dark chocolate. And there's different ways to make it up, or just buy a supplement, I guess. Yeah, but Oyster Max, I think, is a great option to help you balance zinc and copper
Yeah.
intake.
And I don't
Um,
think cacao, I mean, I think cocoa and cacao, I mean, I know cocoa and cacao are different. I'm
mm,
curious as to how much zinc would actually be in cocoa because it's, extracted at such high
mm,
temperatures and it's often they sometimes alkalize cocoa
right.
because to make it less bitter for making cakes, whereas cacao is like the cold pressed version of cocoa. So it's just a lot more rich in nutrients.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, so probably better to stick to the cacao in general
Yeah, like
than
raw
cocoa.
cacao for sure. Yeah.
Mm.
And it tastes much better anyway. I mean, the other one, I think it's called Dutch processed cacao. That means that it's alkalized, is not the best.
Yeah, so when I spoke to Chris Masterjohn, for the Long COVID Reset Summit, which is again this November 18th to 20th, you can register at longcovidreset.com. He did mention that a lot of people may have to take zinc supplementation for a year or so before they rebuild their whole body zinc stores, which kind of
Mm.
reminds me of this conversation I had with you where you pointed out that this time 20 years ago when I felt
Oh
really, really
yeah,
clear-headed
didn't
and
eat.
sharp because I was eating an extremely low-calorie diet. I was probably in ketosis. It probably wasn't the low calories. It was probably the ketosis that had
Mm.
me feeling so hyper-focused and clear-headed and so much mental clarity. Um, so yeah. All right. So the purpose of bringing up that was that you told me that, that's fine for like a limited extremely small amounts of
Mm.
food for a period of time, but if you continue that, or any real like extreme dietary maneuvers where you're like eliminating a lot of nutritional substances that you need, you will
Mm.
deplete your nutritional stores within a certain period of time. I mean, like a lot of us grew up with a lot of pretty I don't know, maybe not well balanced, but like there's a lot of like nutritional supplementation in the food in the US, so to try to
Yeah,
prevent
fortified. Yeah,
fortification. Yeah.
yeah.
But after, I mean, if you go super low calorie, or you become like pure vegetarian, or you limit your diet in like an extreme way, um, after a year or 2 years or 5 years, you may have depleted something and suddenly hit a wall, right? So can you talk a little
Hmm.
bit about that? I mean, how people, and what do you think about carnivore? I mean, is there a risk there if you're avoiding organs, or maybe not a risk if you eat all the organs?
Yeah, I think if you eat all the organs, I mean, they're quite nutrient dense. From what I know of carnivore, the thing is more about micronutrients and also fiber, because obviously there's pretty much no fiber. And although fiber is the kind of thing where some people think it's overblown, the need for fiber, especially people in the more carnivore and paleo sphere. I think there was actually a really big research study that I think it was done in Australia and people who did paleo for a certain amount of time actually had not the microbiomes were not so good, and they attributed it to the lack of fiber, even in a paleo diet, which is you're still having vegetables and you're still having sweet potatoes, but you're just not having things like oats or whole grains or anything like that. So yeah, I think that fiber is important, maybe more or less for certain people, and I think probably people feel great on the carnivore diet for the same reason that you felt really good. Well, on top of, you were probably in ketosis, but imagine you have an autoimmune disease and all of a sudden you cut out everything that's kind of triggering you, like all the nightshade vegetables, all the phytates, mineral blockers, oxalates, like all of these things are just kind of stopping, and you're just getting bioavailable nutrients. You must feel amazing and also be in ketosis. But then who knows long term about, I mean, no one's ever tried carnivore. I don't think there are any studies that people have done carnivore for like 20 years or 30 years and seen what actually happens to their microbiome over that time. But I think Rhonda Patrick talks about in particular the micronutrients that you get from things like fruits and that you can't necessarily get, and so yeah, I think that this also happens commonly with people who are vegan, and they go vegan, they feel great because they're eating vegetables instead of KFC or whatever, and you just feel really good, but then you are not getting certain nutrients. We did this whole section on veganism, but things like B vitamins and then vitamin A basically doesn't exist in plant foods. It's carotenoids, which is this needs a process to kind of unlock the vitamin A, which is retinol in animal foods. So there are just a bunch of nutrients that basically you become depleted over time. And then it can be even years, 3 or 5 years, that you suddenly just feel terrible and start feeling fatigued or putting on weight, or this has happened to most of the vegans that I know, and then they realize that they need to kind of make a change. So yeah, definitely not going off how you feel immediately or even in the short term, like a couple of months, is always kind of, it's like, oh great, I found this thing, it works, I'm just going to keep doing this forever. Like, it's usually not the case, which is kind of annoying, but it would be nice.
Yeah, we had a question, I think it was yesterday, where someone was like, can I eat the same thing every day and be healthy?
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I mean, I guess. What do you think about that? I mean, if it's like got everything you need.
I mean, I guess if it has everything you need, if that
But
would be
sometimes you
possible,
might need,
but
like, there's some things where it's like, having liver once a week, or an oysters like
yeah,
once a month or
exactly.
something. It's like, can you have like a tiny fraction of an oyster every
Yeah.
day?
I think if you did it in this really robotic way where you actually figured out everything that you need and then portioned it into the day in some way and ate it at the right times, but I don't think many people are really going to do that. Most people are kind of could just sort of try to eat normally, and maybe what people mean by eating the same thing every day is like, oh, I'll have oatmeal and then I'll have like chicken salad and then I'll have this, and that can be fine for a while, but there are so many micronutrients in, and our ancestors used to eat a lot more diversity than what we have now. With wild fruits and vegetables, they're a lot more nutrient dense and also just varied. And seasonality, I think we spoke about this, like eating the same thing over and over can actually trigger you to become intolerant to, which usually would mean if eating the same thing over and over triggered an intolerance, it would probably indicate you already had some kind of gut health issue and it was just aggravated by that. But yeah, just chickens don't lay eggs in the same quantity every year. They go through periods of not laying eggs at all. Some vegetables only grow in summer. Some, like we're supposed to eat according to what's provided from nature. So just eating the same thing every day doesn't really make sense, I think, according to being in accordance with nature and what our body needs. So
Yeah, makes sense. Any closing remarks before we bring this to a close?
I think that's it.
Yeah.
There's
Okay,
no more
cool.
questions.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll be planning to do something like this every Thursday going forward. So if you do have questions for Michelle or myself, preferably on like a lifestyle nutrition kind of topic, then let us know and we'll try to get to those every week. All right. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.
All right.